want to visit, like 5 to 50 years, 50 to 100, or above 100 years? 5 to 50? 1. 2. Okay. 50 to 100? Oh, okay. No, now people want to travel. And then over 100 years? Yes, okay. Don't be shy. Yeah, that's good. We have a couple of people, so they want to. Okay, that's good. Okay, so how do you foresee the future, both of you? Starting with Peter, maybe.
Yeah, if I just relate to the time, how far we should go, I would prefer a time which would still be relevant for our case here, in the sense that if we go very, very far away, it may be a very fancy technology, but can we use it? There's always another question is the misuse of technologies. And I would say that in a way, how we would bring technology from the future is also related to our kind of moral, ethical standing of the humanity. And this is very tricky. If we think that we would have a black hole, we bring a black hole from the future, it would be enough for Germany to provide all its energy for 1 year with just 100 kilograms of material. But it's a huge bomb as well. Could that be misused? So these questions become, it's not anymore technology, but it comes to the essence of humanity, how we deal with technology. Yeah. So I would prefer, let's say, a shorter distance where I could bring some immediately to scaling up, for instance, the clean technologies, or doing the things, but with almost what we have, because of there's so tricky questions that would come up with the future.
Yes. And see, I just had a look. The online audience was 50-50 with past and future. So they are much more into the future than you guys. I mean, I don't want to make a competition between the online and offline audience, right? But we're going to observe these differences. That's interesting. Would you like to say something about the future, Naki?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, let me just, what Peter just said, let me phrase it what he said in my own words. I think this can be seen as a paradox of technology and our thinking about the future, that many of these things can be exceedingly positive for our society, but they can be also negative. And very often technology is both the solution and the problem. And this is why I would also argue that going to, let's say, 2050 in the future, that's beyond my lifetime, so it would be very interesting to see what happens thereafter, precisely because that's roughly the time span when our societies, if you look back in the past, when our societies really change fundamentally. You know, if you go 50 years back, you know, that's beginning of the jet age, that's the beginning of the internet, and so on. Let's not go to all of those details, but the point is that some of the systems and our lifestyles also change over the 30 period, but there are more incremental changes. For example, the best example is the mobile phone. Everybody in the world has a mobile phone. It's an incredible success, both in the global north and global south. And that took 30 years. It started in 1990. Took 30 years. So if you look forward 30 years, that's 2050. We can achieve a lot. And maybe another observation, as many of you know, right now there is a conference of the parties on the climate convention in Glasgow. There have been some really, I think, encouraging commitments to go toward net zero 2050 in the emissions or thereafter. And for that, we need Herculean efforts over the next 30 years.
That's interesting because the online audience wants to go much further in the future, distant years, 50% over 100 years. Okay. Whereas 50 to 100 is almost 16%, and near, like 5 to 50, is 33%. That's really interesting. Yeah. I hope they get inspired by what you're saying, right?
Yeah, but that could also reflect our kind of a human nature, that we hope for a savior. Or something that saves these very great problems that we have. And this is very often, I think, in humanity, if you look on where we have hard times, and climate change indeed is one of the grand challenges, maybe the grand challenge. And in that sense, you hope maybe for a silver bullet or something which would solve this. And unfortunately, very often we have to do the work. There's nothing that comes from outside which does the work that we should do. We need to make decisions. Everybody needs to do something. Yeah. And in that sense, we can't outsource maybe these questions to technology. Maybe there is in the future something. You never know. This is also how science works. I mean, we haven't invented everything. And I think in the future, there's for sure must be very interesting things which I don't know. Anybody don't know.
Yes, me neither.
Yeah. But anyway, I think in a way that as a humans, let's be prepared to do ourselves also in climate change something.
Yes. Naki, yes?
Yeah, just a brief comment. I think there is also a lot that speaks for going further into the future, even though my preference would be 2050. But going beyond 100 years also, I think, has a very strong logic. One of the reasons is, for example, the climate problem. Even if we go down to net zero by 2050 emissions, which is the objective, we will not stabilize the climate in over 100 years. It takes a long time. I think that is probably true with the digital revolution too. It's going to fundamentally change our society, like the mobile phone and internet have. That will probably also take many, many decades. So I think there are good reasons for going in the future, in addition to what Peter said, that we all somehow have this desirable, aspirational goal of being, in a sustainable world that's just and equitable and fair to everybody and saves the nature at the same time.
Of course. Right? I mean, let me just ask the audience very quickly about don't lose it, about, because let's say they go to the future, like, how could a time machine help us reinvent the energy system? Okay, you want to go to the future, so you want to see, a time machine help us, it doesn't matter now, future or past. Let's have the poll. What does it bring us? See the future problems to act now. That would be the number one. So it means like see the reality of the future, learn about all this, and of course the consequences so that we know what to do now. Second, bring back future technologies, or maybe other things. So what do you think here on site? I think we have more people. By the way, do we have more scientists now than before? Scientists, raise your hands. No, okay, they all want to become scientists, but okay. So, see the future problems to act now. Who wants that? See the future problems to act now. Yeah, I know you wanted to go to the past, but now we're about the future. So, okay, well, that's very shy answer. 2, 4, 6, 7. So, okay, bring back future technologies. Yeah, they are more technology-oriented, it seems. Okay, good. And other comments? We're going to have the results of this poll in a second. And then I want to know, because I really want to see what they think about the past. They want it all to go to the past, and I want to, what you said, Naki, I want to go back also and ask them when exactly. But first we wait for the results of this thing. So we see it's not a there is no great majority for you don't know, right? That's the thing. I mean, who knows? What would you do? Would you bring back technologies yourself, or would you just simply like check what's happening and work on the consequences already today?
Well,
Naki?
Yeah, my honest answer is, I don't think that's not possible in reality. Even if we could go into the future, it's simply not possible. So I think it's a nice concept to think about it. But I would argue that we have problems today. We don't need to go to the future. I mean, we know what the problems are. We have the pandemic, the real tragedy of the pandemic. Even though science has been great, we have vaccinations, but not everybody wants to be vaccinated.
Right.
We have the climate problem, lots of pledges to have the climate neutrality by 2050 and avoid the major crisis, and yet we don't know whether we will change our lifestyles, whether we will really behave in accordance to that, and maybe we go into those details. Thirdly, what I already mentioned, I think digital revolution also has huge dangers on privacy, but enormous potential benefits for the society, as we already see today during the pandemic. I mean, we have digital audience.
Yes.
This is quite something new. It's happening as we are speaking. So I would say, if you just mentioned those three problems, we have enough to do today, and I think we have to solve this today. And the future, this is the problem of going into the future. Future is indeterminate. It has many branching points. What would you bring to the present? So I would argue, let's try to think how to resolve these problems concretely in a practical way and choose the future that's desirable to us.
That's a good one. I see the audience wants to learn about the future problems and solve them now, and I see the comments are coming now. The idea of the future is part of escapism, and no, it's starting. No, it's going to be fun. Okay, good. Peter, please.
Yeah, I think both in a way, past and future are so intriguing. And I think about, again, the question go to the past, in the sense that I think it would matter indeed. But the timing is important. Where to the past should we go? If you go to the wrong point, nobody cares. Nobody understands, maybe. And I think we have enough information now that we know slightly about the future, what will happen if we don't act, for instance, now properly with the climate change. But I think the time point going to past is a point where we have strong social cohesion. And with social cohesion, I mean that we act as a mankind, not as nationalists or nations. We act as a mankind. And where can I find those time points? I think one is very often to huge catastrophes. We find those, like after the war, when the whole Europe was destroyed, most of the world was destroyed. There was strong cohesion between populations to do something for the future. So I would go back to that 1945.
It's the perfect moment now to ask, where do you want to go back?
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, no, that's perfect. You make my transition. This is
I will
fantastic.
continue.
Peter, you can moderate with me next time. This is fantastic. Okay, so let's do the poll, online and offline. Let's see the questions. So, audiences, I see that you are going on comment. Let's concentrate on the poll now. When and how did it go all wrong? Where would you go back to fix it? So, first, 5,000 BC, not before Corona, before Christus. Money enters the stage. Second, Industrial Revolution. Well, 1660, 1840, right? Invention of electricity, 1819. Invention of cars, 1886. Invention of airplanes, 1903. Invention of the internet and all the following, like smartphones and etc. coming up, 83. So you have all this. I want to know now. Oh, do you have enough here? No, we miss here the internet. So okay, well I will do it to you. So okay, online you go on. You're busy. I do offline. So money enter the stage. Who wants to go back then? Start of capitalism? No. Okay, good. Industrial Revolution. 1. Okay.
3.
Oh, sorry. Who? Please raise one. Really, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Even 4. Okay, 5. Okay. Who says more? Good. That was Industrial Revolution. 5. Invention of electricity. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's convenient, right? Yeah. Okay. 4. Good. Invention of cars. 1, 2, 3. Okay. This is surprising. Airplanes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, airplane 6. Okay, and the internet? The internet? No one. That's really interesting. Okay, I want to know now online. Tell us, and online, if you didn't have the internet, please put it in the comments so that we know if you are also for or against or whenever. It's not being for it or against. It's just to go back and fix maybe what happened back then. So we have. Oh, wow. Okay, it's only 7, but industrial revolutions. 85%. Okay, so it's really interesting to see we have different perspectives here. Okay, so so let's examine the responses before we go now to the reality and the solution. So, is it realistic to actually expect to fix something from the past? Naki, you want to start with this question?
Well, depends what you mean by that.
Yes, okay.
In some way.
Well,
in the practical sense,
yes.
I think, history does not repeat itself. We know that. But certain patterns do repeat. And from that point of view, it is, I think, very instructional. I think what the majority of people thinks to go back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to understand how all of that unfolded. We shouldn't forget that the Industrial Revolution brought benefit to many, to billions people today, but has also left billions behind. Industrial Revolution is a story of great successes, but it's also a story of famines and major major disasters, oppression of the working people, and so on. But I think one of the greatest achievements of humanity in the Industrial Revolution was abolishment of the slavery that followed. And so we can think of such big liberation justice movements today for the future. So from that point of view, it's interesting, but let me just make one comment. I would argue that the invention itself is not critical. What you have up there.
This is what Leila is saying in the online chat, yes?
I would argue what's critical is actually the diffusion. How do we adopt new things, new institutions, new technologies, new lifestyles, and that takes time. And this is why it's important to think about the future, because it'll take time. So I think that, just one example, cars. It took about 30 years to replace horses by cars.
Yes.
So it might take 30 years to replace, internal engine combustion vehicles by electric vehicles. So it takes time.
So this is exactly what Leila was saying in the chat. Wonderful. Peter.
Yeah, I agree fully that, the list that we see here on the screen are technical disruptions. These are technologies. Yeah. But the consequences are societal. These are so important innovations that they exploded the whole society. They created kind of new type of thinking. They brought even democracy. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, there's a time of the Enlightenment where the human being for the first time gets a value. You think about the French philosophers. Yeah. And I think that may have been a time point when this big transition happens, the subtle transition. Had we brought the institutions already then that may correct the faults that comes? We didn't have any corrective ways to solve the problems that our technologies would do. At that time of enlightenment, where people were really open to really reform the whole planet, they say that we can now actually start the planet again. And that was the time point, had to put the institutions that give the feedback, make these corrections. I think maybe we could have saved some of the problems that we have here. But I agree, it's not the technology question, but it's everything else what comes along that. Okay.
So now let's go back to the sad reality, we don't have a time machine. Or maybe it's not sad, maybe it's good we don't have a time machine. I'm not going to judge this. So let us go maybe into the part into the reality and the solution. Right? So how would that work? And I think that I was saying for those of you who came a little bit later, also online or offline, we will structure the discussion in two parts. The first part will be more about the technologies, the real technology, and please focus your questions on the technology. And the second part will be on society more. It doesn't mean it's not related, obviously, but we want to have these questions more organized into that way. And you made me the comment, Peter, to say, well, technology is made by humans and by society, and it is. You had a wonderful comment on this. You remember you were saying like, you cannot really separate the two, right?
Yeah, technology is part of the human, let's say, intelligence.
Yes.
About the creativity that humans have, and why did we invent technologies? Is basically to improve our living conditions, which is not bad. But again, as Naki said, there's consequences. And this is important to take responsibility, not just to use technology, but we have to be responsible. And this is the question, is that we are very creative. And that's something that will not disappear before the mankind disappears. And that's a force that I think can solve these problems that we're talking about even today.
So let us see. This is the part where I stop asking a little bit more. Maybe I want to give you the stage much more online or also here offline. And this is the moment where you can ask your question. So don't be shy. I know we have two very impressive scientists here on stage, really bright minds, but we all have bright minds and we want to know. And asking is never stupid. Asking is always good. So there are no stupid questions. Don't be shy and ask the questions where you're really interested. It is a unique opportunity to be here for you who are here in the museum with us. It's a unique opportunity, a unique encounter, so use it. And for you online, we don't forget you, we see you here. So, and I get your questions here on my phone at the same time. So you are totally with us. So ask your questions also. I will make the best I can to check the questions we have online. So to introduce this discussion, maybe to make it a little bit easier. So we said we do not have a time machine, and which technologies will help us to save the future, so to speak, to make a better future. What are outstanding examples? You can talk about different technologies and batteries and nuclear and whatever comes up. You can ask them because they will know. But maybe to start the conversation, like, do we have a question now? In case we have a question now. Okay. This is Saturday morning, but it is 11. It's a 11:15, right? You are kicking, right? Good. And online, just check. Oh, we have a question. This is great. Oh no, we have a comment from Mathurin Dovel. By growing in the past, could we massively scale its nuclear in the 90s and also invest more in renewables?
Oh.
Yeah, I mean that's a comment. Technology, nuclear technology. Any questions about nuclear technology on this? Hold on, I would like to ask you to stand up, please, so that we can see you, the camera can see you, and you get a disinfected microphone.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it okay with the mask? Can you?
Yes, but please articulate well for us. Please.
Sorry. So I was actually wondering, I don't know how technologists you guys are, but what do you think was the state of renewable in the 70s, basically when we could have started to tackle climate change? And would it have been possible to have the scale up that we have nowadays, or would we have had to rely on another technology? Basically, if we had known if the public had known in the 70s, like it hadn't been hidden by the oil industry, could we have scaled up renewables as fast as we're doing today, or would we have had to rely on another clean technology, like nuclear, for example, I guess? But maybe you have other in mind that were available back then.
Yes, thanks to ask your question clearly, not too fast, and really have a question. Yeah? Okay, so who wants to take it first?
Sure.
Yeah, well,
Peter.
Technology evolution is complex. Technologies come like waves, and they go like waves. And very often when a new energy technology kind of pops up, you need to have the basic science already done there. You need the kind of all around, kind of a fertile ground where the technology comes out. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, I think we may perhaps slightly speed up some things, no question. But this kind of fundamental change that we would bring, let's say, some of our technology 100 years back, there's not the fertile ground. There's not enough knowledge, the science to do that. So unfortunately, we are very often kind of locked into something. But this question is maybe also, could we speed the lock out? We are locked into technology because of the boundary conditions, because we are not able to do anything else. And what happened is at some point, the new technologies may be mature enough to take off and take on the technologies of the old. And that's where the lockout becomes important, to let off from the old. And this is, I think, one of the dilemmas that some technologies just keep on going, even though we could have the better technologies to go on. That's part of more the social behavior side as well. So I think in that sense, when the technology is ripe, we could do something quicker. But the fundamental problem is always with the question that everything else around, science, infrastructures, need to be supporting technologies, need to be there that we can make the change. Mm-hmm. But again, it looks like that we have this kind of path dependencies, that the history goes into the future maybe too long, and we could actually cut off it by decisions.
I would like to also take a crack at this. I think that's an important question. I mean, arguably today we are at crossroads. The world is at a crossroads. I mean, we are at the junction. We have a possibility of going in a sustainable direction, but we also have a possibility of continuing the current trends that I think will lead us to a dead end in some ways. It would be a bad road to take. I think 70s, that was the question, was a similar situation 50 years ago, and that's when I started my professional life. So I remember very well all of these debates about nuclear, about the renewables, and so as Peter said, I mean, this is a very complex issue, but let me say and it's an evolutionary process, so with ups and downs and so on, experimentation, failure, success, and so on. This is why it takes time. But on renewables, you know, the challenge then in 1973, we have the energy crisis, serious energy crisis, even more energy price explosions than we have today. 79 was the culmination of that. And it was clear that renewables would be a part of the solution at that time. There was absolutely no doubt. I think there was a strong consensus, with some, you know, with some exceptions. But what would have been required for renewables to contribute more back then would have been determined and sustainable investments, and we didn't have that. You know, one thing that we know about technological evolution is that the more you invest in technology, the better it becomes, the cheaper it becomes.
Right.
And that really only happened over the last 2 decades with renewables, with the new institutional arrangements, with quite lots of investment. But at the same time, let me say that the peak of investments was in 2017, not today. So the peak of investments is behind us. I mean, it's almost a paradox. And the good news is that the developing countries are investing quite a lot in the meantime in renewables. And there was a question about nuclear back then in the 70s. You know, there were so-called safe nuclear reactor designs that did not make it. They were not selected at the end of the day. The nuclear costs have exploded in the meantime. So, you know, I think nuclear might be still a solution in many of the countries, but we will need new technological breakthroughs to make nuclear safe and acceptable, and most important, economically viable.
Absolutely. There is an ongoing discussion on nuclear energy in France right now. 2 weeks ago, I think the president has been announcing that they was wishing to have more research on new prototypes of small nuclear reactors that would be much smaller and not that complicated and not that dangerous. So in France, it's a very hot discussion all the time because we rely on nuclear energy a lot there.
Yeah, if I may, this is a very controversial issue, as you all know, exceedingly controversial. But, you know, in our scientific opinion that's based on the evidence review report of SAPEA to the Commission, we argue in one of the recommendations that this diversity in Europe can be also seen as a richness, not just as a controversial issue, but as a enrichment, because there will be different options and different solutions might work in different parts of Europe. That could be an idea of having a resilient approach on the way forward. But I hope that we will abandon what doesn't work and invest massively in what works. So that's how I see this crossroads that I was talking about.
We have a question also from online. I just want to check before the person precise the question, maybe. Any other question from the offline audience here? So yes, we have one. This is great. I wait for Oro to please precise your alienation question, and I will check it afterwards. So first, I'll take you. So please stand up and welcome and thank you for your question.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My question's about dual-use technologies, which you were talking about before. And I'm just curious to hear more about what you think scientists and regulators' roles might be in terms of development, but at the same time, regulation of them. So because everything has potential for good and risk, what do you see as these different stakeholders' roles?
Peter,
well,
start.
This is a very good question. In particular, if we think about the magnitude of the change that we need now in energy, for instance, and going to sustainable energy. So we move from a technological change actually to a societal change. Most of our legislation, regulation that we typically have in our countries, they support the present technology, or let's say the past technologies already. We needed regulation and laws that the old technologies could work. And now when we bring the new technologies, which may have quite different characteristics, are not like the old technologies. So our old regulation and old laws may not work with that. They may be even a barrier against the new technologies. So in that sense, we need to update our institutions. I mean with institutions, legislation, regulation, standards, norms, so that the new technologies can come in. And therefore, the legislative part of the transition becomes very, very important. I think Europe is proceeding to the Green Deal now, to that point where we really start to form our legislation so that that becomes optimal for the new technologies to come in. Regulation will be always important in some sense. I mean, the free market most likely will not take care. We need regulation. Even though we would have carbon pricing, which is an important mechanism, there's still kind of black spots where that doesn't work, so we need a regulation there too. So there's a combination. We have technologies, we have the regulation and policies, and of course the social behavior, which we may talk slightly later on. So this is a kind of a combination of elements which need to work together as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Naki.
Yeah, in the scientific opinion, but also in the SAPEA evidence review report, there is a strong argument made that this needs to be people-centered process. That means it needs to be inclusive. That means that, NGOs, all of the stakeholders have to be involved, but we also shouldn't forget public and private sector stakeholders. At the end of the day, it's the private sector that invests, so we have to make sure that the investments go into the right direction. This is why we argue very strongly that that should be the case. But there are two or three components to that, I think, to make that viable. One component is that I'm afraid we are talking about really disruptive change. If you are going to achieve the European Green Deal, it's not going to be smooth. It's going to be disruptive. That means some people will be left behind. We already see today with the explosion of energy prices that there are many energy poors in Europe, maybe on the order of 30, perhaps even 50 million people. We need a safety net for them. That means as the carbon price increases that Peter mentioned, this is very likely, otherwise we are not going to steer ourselves in the right direction. The revenue needs to be neutral in the sense that it should be used to support those who are at the risk of energy poverty, but should be also used to support some of these innovations we are talking about. So in that sense, it has to be a really inclusive process. And let me just conclude this thought by saying one of the motivations for me saying that I would like to go 50 years back in 70s when I started working on these issues is because I wish so strong that in the 70s we had a movement like Fridays for Future and Scientists for Future.
Why didn't you start it back then?
Well, yeah, why did we not start it? It's a good question. Why? I mean, there were movements, but they did not diffuse. They were not accepted. Didn't become a part of ourselves. Yeah. And so, finally, I think we need to ask ourselves in this, inclusive, people-centered process that I hope will happen, how will we, as individuals and collectively, have new norms, new culture that's consistent with European Green Deal?
Yeah. So now we have tons of questions coming up. So we need to we can be a little bit faster, a bit quicker. I don't forget you, dear offline audience, but we have the online audience that's coming strong. And I'm going to take the question I was excluding just before. So maybe a short answer. Anything to say about technology and alienation? So perhaps the question might mean something like, if you have technological development without making sure everyone is on board, do we leave parts of society behind feeling alienated? If so, this would obviously be a problem, right?
I think this is a very central question in the future, is that when we develop technologies, we have to have the human component. For instance, acceptability. Do people accept the technology? In the past, nobody asked you. They just brought the technologies. But nowadays, it has to be more, technologies need to be developed in interaction with the humans. And I think you are the best experts to judge, is this suitable, this technology?
Yes.
So it means that from very top down, we need to come more to the bottom up type of approaches.
Okay.
So you have to combine scientifically social science and technology much more, as Naki said, that it's really people-centered. That brings also to the question of justice, which is so important. This transition we're speaking about, it should not be unjust. Everybody has to be kept on board, not just in Europe. I mean, Europe is less than 10% of the emissions globally. 90% is elsewhere. 60% of the emissions are in Asia, in countries which are struggling to get the better living standard. So we need also to think more globally about justice globally. And maybe rich nations like European Union need to be part of that development to help the less favored countries to go more sustainable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quick, because we have so many questions coming now.
You know, this
Tell me,
explains actually why the diffusion process takes such a long time. You have to bring everybody on board. Sometimes things don't get accepted. There are failures. When they're accepted, everybody needs to be on board. And I think a good example we have today is the great scientific success of having vaccination against COVID. But many people don't want to vaccinate. So we don't know. It's indeterminate. We don't know what will happen. Will we win the pandemic because everybody will eventually be infected, or because everybody will be eventually protected?
Okay.
We don't know.
We will have this discussion in a year probably, so note it or something. But no, I see that the person who had a question about alienation has a comment on this, which is bringing the question in another direction. We're going to keep it at the transition to society, so stay tuned. I have another question. What technologies do you think are ripe, in quote, to break through and change the world in the next 30 years? That's a good question. I want to know too.
Yeah. Well, as I like very much technologies and work with that, there are very interesting technologies coming on based on scientific discoveries, in particular materials and other fields, which are, let's say, ripe in the laboratories, but needs soon to be brought on the market. And one is to combine solar energy and fuel production. We call it solar fuels, which are actually coping with the circular economy, using materials which are abundant. Everybody have those technologies, and basically it's about combining air, water, sun, and supercatalysts. So with those elements, what we have free everywhere: air, water, sun, and then we need the magic ingredient, so to say. We can make fuels, we can make chemicals, fertilizers, everything what society needs. And it's totally closed cycle, circular economy. And that would be the super technology which I would go to the future to look on. Would that come? There's a few things, we do it already in laboratories, and it's in the next 30 years, as the question is, I think if we speed that technology, and I know that Helmholtz in Germany doing much work in this, this could be a breakthrough technology. Again, it may take time. Let's be patient. As Naki said, the diffusion process is long. But there's a lot of hope as well to have this kind of people's technology for the people, and which would be harmless, so to say, for everybody and environment.
Okay. Naki, another aspect?
First of all, I would encourage everybody to look at the two reports, because we describe the portfolio of technologies, both what can be done immediately and what's breakthrough in 10 years or so. And, you know, I think...
we have the link in the, I hope, of the reports. We'll have the link in the comments again for those who came a little bit later, yes?
So it's clear, you know, zero carbon energy sources like renewables, electrification of the world. We need to go electric. But I think, and Peter has mentioned those, so I will not repeat it, but you know, I think there is another important area, since we talk about inclusiveness, is what are we going to, as consumers, to do? I think that's going to be the biggest issue. You know, will we replace our oil and natural gas heating with heat pumps? Will we all drive electric cars? Or even better, will we use public transport and bicycles and walking? Just to mention a couple of examples. Will we have hydrogen aircraft and hydrogen ships in the future? This is all a part of a portfolio. These are more disruptive technologies, probably to start entering the market in about 10 years. And then I think the big unknown is what the digital revolution will do. I think this is a real big thing. You know, one could even say, you know, it has started with the pandemic. We are going into the virtual world, you know, enhanced reality through internet and other digital technologies. But on going towards zero emissions, that's going to be a very important part of the equation. At the same time, lurking with some dangers like privacy, misinformation, and so on. So it's a long story. I just wanted to mention that what is very close to us, technologies that are closest to us, are quite important. And those are the ones that will actually actually steer the nature of the energy system, other systems like recycling. You know, you cannot have circular economy if we don't recycle ourselves.
Yes.
It's simply not possible. But we have to protect the nature, we have to reserve the materials, we have to use, you know, let's say urban mining and the materials that are in the system in order to decouple ourselves from negative environmental impacts. We published a UNEP report earlier this year that we called Making Peace with Nature. That's what we...
Making peace with
nature. So we have
nature,
to make
note
peace with
this.
ourselves,
Yes.
and we have to make peace with the nature.
That's a very good one, very good title.
But I think what is important, like you said, that the magnitude of the change, it's like the industrial revolution in the 18th century. And that's a challenge. We need, there's not one single bullet, though I like this sort of fuels. But there's many technologies which you need together. And we have technologies, and then we need the glue between that. The glue may be energy storage, digitalization. And this architecture of energy will change so fundamentally. And that makes the huge societal also change that we have.
This is good because you introduced the next question. You were a really great moderator. So what's a past technology we stopped using or that is underdeveloped but can be a better option, eco-friendly? Is there any past technology we stopped using or which is still underdeveloped?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, let me share something that I think you're all aware, and you mentioned that the cars came in 1900, 1903, let's say. Don't forget, at that time we had very environmentally friendly cars. We had electric cars, and it was not even clear whether the internal combustion will rule the game or electricity. And so we are returning a century later to the same technology that has been stopped in the embryonic footsteps of innovation. It's just as an example.
Yes.
Of course, renewable energy was even in pre-industrial times. You know, we shouldn't forget that hunters and gatherers and early agricultural Neolithic societies were quite sustainable from the point of view of energy. We used the sun flow, the river flow, animal, human. So this needs to come back. Bicycle is human muscle power.
That's right. That's right. And that's a very good energy. So someone is saying we are told energy storage is needed to tackle the unpredictability of solar and wind energy. Is this entirely true? No, we need the scientists here. Is this entirely true, or with better predicting techniques and better mechanism to sell electricity?
Yeah.
So, unpredictability of solar and wind energy and energy storage. Is it true?
Well, based on the scientific evidence report that SAPEA developed, actually this question needs to reform in the sense that what we need is flexibility. Not just energy storage, but that may be part of demand response, where digitalization comes from, that if the demand and supply of energy is not in balance, we could do some small tricks, just reduce the demand for 1 hour, half an hour, that is in balance. So if we don't have the wind, we could slightly smooth that. We may have also kind of a smart charging of electric vehicles, this electrification, which Naki talked about, that we electrify not just the electric sector, but we use electricity from solar and wind also for mobility, for heating houses. Actually, most of the energy that we need in Germany, for instance, is for heating. More than 60% of the energy goes for heating. That's where we could use electricity and heat pumps very effectively. So this kind of sector coupling may be one way actually to go around the question of mismatch. No solar. But again, going slightly forward in time, we see that energy storage definitely will become important. And in particular now when the transportation is getting electrified. Typically the batteries in your cars they live for about 10 years. After 10 years, the battery capacity has come down to 70%, so you wouldn't use in a car. But these batteries are excellent still for energy storage, for solar and wind. And we expect, and that was also mentioned in the SAPEA report, that by 2035, 2030, we could have kind of a second life batteries from the cars coming, putting in the solar and wind, which represents about 10-15% of the peak demand of whole Europe. So this is also how the logistics will work. So we wouldn't need just building batteries for solar and wind, but just use the scrap from the electric vehicles. Use sector coupling, demand-side response, a magnitude of things that we already have, which needs organizational issues, how we organize, how the regulation works. There's no incentives nowadays. We don't have proper regulation that gives a market signal. If we have those in place, this huge family of flexibility technologies, regulation, market signals, I don't see a problem as a scientist in this mismatch question.
So you were saying a bit earlier, because I just need to check also, like they are doing strong here online. So if you have questions, make yourself visible. I will have a look. I see that there is a question coming. I just need to ask another last question here. Actually, no, you are first.
Okay, first of all, my question is about nuclear. Do you think that without disasters such as Chernobyl, like, how RBMK reactors, like in the past, they have been disasters. If those big disasters in history never happened, do you think that we could, that basically nuclear technology could have gotten very big in the world, and we could very, very easily reach renewable energy in our current state right now? And second of all, my question is more about the risk of new technologies with energy, especially. For example, let's say black hole technologies, right? At what point do you think are new technologies, especially for energy, is worth the risk? Because at one point is one technology worth the risk for its benefits for the world? Because as you know, even nuclear technology has its risks. So yeah.
So
what I just want to make a note, because the interesting part in your question also is talking about the disasters. It never happened. We never, if you notice in our discussion, we already consider the society dimension also of this. So I like this very much, because I want to move also into the society in the next question. So please, sorry.
Yeah. So my specific response to this important question is that a stylized fact of evolution of new technologies and systems is that at the beginning you have very large diversity. I just mentioned before, at the beginning we had steam cars, electric cars, and so on. You have very large diversity, and there is a selection mechanism through customers, selection mechanism, and part of that selection mechanism is also a response to disasters and accidents. When railways came first, everybody was scared of railways. I mean, it was unprecedented speed that the railways operated. Many people thought it would be dangerous to our health. This turned out to be unwarranted, but when Hindenburg went up, it was the end of the airships.
Yes.
And so Chernobyl was a very important negative event in the evolution of nuclear technologies. And so what I'm trying to say is accidents will happen. That's the nature of technological change. It is important that we have regulatory mechanisms and proper social response to improve the technology, and if it turns out that it's a dead end, to abandon it, because we also have limited resources. But diversity is very important, because none of us know whether you're an expert or you're a member of a general public or an NGO. None of us know what will be successful in the future, but we know roughly the direction. It needs to be zero emissions, it needs to be sustainable, and so on. So the direction we know, we have aspirational goals, but exactly how to get there we don't understand, but we know what is needed.
So we need to work on this, yes.
We have a portfolio of technologies that are needed, but how that will exactly evolve is an issue of policies, regulatory mechanisms, and our personal choice.
Yes. Peter.
I think what is very important also to recognize are, let's say, for instance, how nations or companies deal with nuclear or any technology. It depends on how you frame. How do you frame that technology? By framing, I mean is against which kind of criteria would you evaluate the technology, and how do you weight these criteria? So if we just think, for instance, nuclear, let's say that the only criteria would be CO2 emissions. Other criteria doesn't matter. So that means even using the free-running rivers in Europe for energy production would be important, or using nuclear. If you start to add then other criteria, like cost store or environment, etc. It means and how we weight those. It means that in some countries you may say that, well, we can't use this technology. We don't find it's optimal, and we use other technologies. So how you frame, how you assess the technologies against a range of criteria. Which criteria do you take on board? That's a political question as well. In some countries you don't take this criteria, in other countries you take the whole list. And how you weight those. That will determine very often also the political decisions that we have seen in the past, and definitely will influence also the decisions in the future, what we have. I think, of course, the question of sustainability is important. Technologies need to be sustainable. Circular economy is important, etc. So we have a lot of important criteria, but keep in mind that different countries may look on different way on this criteria, how to choose, and they may weight. Some countries may say this is not an important criteria. Others say it's important. So it's a very complex issue, as Naki said. This is not simple.
Well, we need also this controversy, like what is right, what is wrong, and there is actually no right, no wrong. There are options, and we need to discuss these, right?
This is a question. And that's why the humans, the people, need to be in society in the center. You need to give the signals. You decide. It's not politicians or companies. You decide. So far, maybe you have been off from the picture, so to say, but we need to bring people back to the center of policies. And then you determine, then you take responsibility. It's your choice. So
this is a very important comment. Thank you so much, Peter. I think there was a second question here at the back.
It's not more of a question, but more of a thought or a dilemma that I have. This is more related to like us saying that innovation is something that we strive for, maybe in the future. But if you look at it, I mean, you also mentioned this, that 60% of the emission is actually coming from Asia in general, right? Because all these companies are kind of manufacturing things and like electronic components, let's say in China or also in other parts of the continent itself. Now, that is something that the innovation is done in let's say in Europe and America, right? So that innovation is coming with a price. This is why, let's say, the countries are kind of generating so much of carbon emission in this case. So I'm more interested to understand your thought process, like from the scientific prospect, like when we talk about innovation, how does that kind of like also work with the society in general right now? Because it is taking us 2 steps forward, but it's also bringing us a step back.
Yeah. So,
Naki?
you know, I think when you look at the innovation process, especially toward net zero carbon, one can say that there is, innovation pull and innovation push. Push comes from the scientific communities, from the research, science, innovation, and pull comes from the society. Now, I think it is for the pull, it's very important to have a vision, long-term vision, accompanied with the short-term action plans. And some of you might be aware that we in Europe have something like that. It's called Fit for 55 package. It was legislated back in June. The reason why it's called 55, Fit for 55, is that it foresees by 2030 a 55% reduction in the emissions in Europe, and by 2050 carbon neutrality. This is exceedingly important because it's a legislation. It's not just hypothetical promise. Now, at the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow, you have seen in the news, many of you, US is clearly committed to that already as well with the Biden administration. China has committed to carbon neutrality by 2060, Japan by 2050, Russia by 2050, and now the big news is India by 2070. So, there are some reasons to be optimistic. But maybe as a part of response to your question, so we have all of these promises and pledges, but now we need a plan. And I hope that our 2 reports are part of that plan. I would not call it central planning, definitely not, but something like a roadmap, how to get from here, there, and in particular, what to do in the short term. And just to illustrate, because I know I'm aware of the lateness of time, let me just make one sentence. To illustrate how important that is, the Nobel Prize winner Kuznets, in one talk in Vienna a few years ago, he said, not having a plan is also a plan, but not a good one. So we better work collectively on a good plan.
That's very good, excellent. Peter, your take on this?
Yeah, I think the question about innovation, all in all, is extremely important. As we know that somebody has once said that about 80% of our welfare comes from innovation. And I think the emerging economies, I don't like the word emerging economies because it makes us so centric here in Europe. But many countries, like in Asia, what it would be important is to strengthen their innovation system. There's a lot of talent in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and so on, which is unused. To use that potential, that also for innovations, which are driven by the needs of these countries. I could envision that wind energy and solar would even look slightly different, actually, if going into the technology based on the needs of these countries. So strengthening the system, their capabilities to come along would be very important. Very important signal from the reports that we've done is also that the new technologies will create job opportunities. We need jobs, people need work, and that's in a way enhances the whole societies. In that sense, I think we need to, in some way, have a feeling that we need to move from a European, let's say, Western world-centric thinking to much more global, to understand that the climate change is not a problem here in Germany or Finland, where I come from. It's a global problem. A global problem is a global solution, and it needs bridging between countries. Now we see much isolation, this kind of superpowers becoming isolated. We would need much more to bridge them and also to bridge the questions that we have in emerging economies. That is the challenge, that we unite more globally.
This is great because you make the transition to the next question, which is, even if we need to think about solutions globally, is it possible to adapt each solution to every political, climatic and social context?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. I mean, there is no unique. So, general purpose technologies, end use, many of the end use technologies we discussed, from the heat pump to the photovoltaic cells to electric vehicles, electric buses, electric public transport, and so on. They are applicable almost everywhere. They're kind of universal technologies. Then infrastructure. We need electric infrastructures. We talked about storage before. Hydrogen might become an important source carrier of energy as well as the storage. So these are generic, but local content will be fundamentally different. And I've mentioned before, I think that's part of the richness and the resilience. Some countries have hydropowers, other countries might have nuclear. In country where I live, nuclear is forbidden by constitution, so we will not see it. Only across our borders, not in Austria. I live in Austria. Yeah. So there will be regional solutions, local solutions. I think we shouldn't just even think at the country level. We have to think about community level. And frankly, we have to think about the family level as well. I wish that some of these issues we are discussing here are also a subject at the dinner table when the family meets on the weekend or whatever. I think we need to develop, as I said before, culture and the new norms about how to adopt these new systems, how that they can become an internal part of ourselves, and it has to be inclusive and universal process. But I think it's not going to be homogeneous, there is no doubt. Some things will be similar that I mentioned, others will be very content specific. Let me just give you an example. Urban areas will be fundamentally different from the countryside. There is absolutely no doubt. You need different measures. And tropical countries will need different and have different resources than the Nordic countries. Where
so the sentence, the claim, think global, act local, will still be,
You need both. You need bottom-up and the top-down. We need top-down vision and goals and roadmaps, I hope, but we need locally specific action that also supports entrepreneurial activities, supports the peace with the nature, as I said, at all levels. So we need both. Diversity is the answer.
Yeah, I think what Naki said is really the way to go, no question. And indeed, our cultural differences are there, which we need to respect. I mean, in that sense, the technologies need adoption to the local conditions. But I would be interested to see also more technology is coming from the non-European countries in a way, and have the let's say the creative potential of these wonderful countries to be part of that and bring solutions which we may not have because of our more siloed thinking, as we do very often, to see some new progress. For instance, the digital technologies, digitalization, where you just look on the bits and you make kind of artificial intelligence, etc. There's a range of very complex areas, but I think a more kind of a global outreach and global input may be very interesting. But indeed, think global, act global. That's the way to go.
Okay, so this is also what I heard a while ago. So I have two questions which are more also into the societal dimensions. The first one is, who will pay for an effective transition? Well, I guess all of us, right?
Yeah. Well,
any further thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think very often we hope that it's the neighbor who pays. But I think it's important now to keep in mind that everybody needs to pay. And here comes the question about the just transition. If I'm a well-doing person, in a way, I would need to change my lifestyle. I just pay the carbon tax or whatever. But if you're not doing well, you're a poor person, you can't afford. And that new regulation hits the weakest in the society. And that's where is the big question. It's a moral, ethical question. We come to the essence of all philosophies, all religions, is that the stronger need to take more responsibility than the weaker. And this, I think, is the essence of the whole climate change. Without being religious or whatever, but is the way that those who have more need to be more active. And in our societies, I think it's going other way around sometimes when we look how the richness is concentrating. So those who have more, you need to be more responsible.
And
this is the point.
Yes, this goes hand in hand. We're not going to make the transition without
that. I don't believe that we can't make a transition if it's not just. So we come to those basic cornerstones of what we call humanity. And that's something that we need to reinvent. It's inside us. Everybody knows that. But we need to live up to that more.
Yeah, so for me, the metaphor pay is perhaps not the best. I would say we need to invest in our future. We need to do that collectively, and it's clear.
So invest rather than
invest
pay.
rather than pay for the following reason. Many of the things that we have been talking about today during the last half an hour and a half, but also the objectives of the UN 2030 agenda with its 17 sustainable goals, the European Green Deal agenda, and so on. All of them have elements of change, disruptive change, that will bring long-term benefits for health, for our life, and so on. So this is why we have to see it as an investment. And another huge multiple benefit is that many of these technologies, once you have invested in them, like renewables, like efficiency, they have exceedingly small operating costs compared to the fossil energies. Just an example. The same thing in the food sector. If we stop throwing food away, if we invest in the healthier food system, will be all better and the nature will be much better. So that's point number one. We are investing in the future. Point number two, it's really important to protect those who are at the risk of being left behind. Every fundamental disruptive change means there will be, at least for a while, losers and winners. And people who are at risk need to be protected to the social network. So part of the investments, I think, needs to go in this just and equitable dimension. Otherwise, we are not going to have the inclusive process we talked about. You know, even people who are opposed to some of these ideas need to be protected. And eventually, I think we will find a socially acceptable solution. But these two components, in my view, are very important. Investing in the future and protecting those who are at the risk of being left behind. It has to be inclusive for everybody.
Peter?
I think it's important to understand that the society as a whole can afford the change. And it's a good investment, as Naki said, good investment in the future. You get a payoff. You get a better future. But the problem is that the society is not homogeneous. And that's why we need this mechanism to see that everybody is on board. As I have lectures in my university on the future of energy, we sometimes calculate how much would it cost for each one to make the change. Let's tomorrow change the world and zero carbon. It would cost you about per person per day, 1 cup of coffee. So 1 cappuccino less a day, and that's done. Then we look worldwide. What does it mean, 1 cup of cappuccino for me? It means for me better health, no question. But that's not a money problem. But let's take a farmer in Africa. It's more than half of his daily living. So how on earth could a poor farmer in Asia or Africa be able to invest? So that's why we need to act as a society. The whole society can afford well. And we don't even observe that money. So it's also an important mindset. And to understand this is an investment that we need to do, and everybody will gain. It's a win-win for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We are checking if we have another question here. We have another question. I still keep the one of Rojo for later. Yes? Here in the middle, the young lady with the pink mask. Is it pink? Right.
It is, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a question connecting to this point of, I guess, diversity of people around the world, but also incentive structures. And I think, Dr. Lund, you brought this up before, which is if we're functioning with such short-term incentive structures, so for the corporate stakeholders on the scale of quarters or even political groups, administrations change, how do we build systems towards long-term change that are, one, just for that global population, but also resilient to changes on those short-term scales, because the incentives aren't long-term. Yeah.
You want to take it first?
I think this is a good question. As everybody knows, the let's say the time scale of thinking of politicians is about the next election, and that's it. And that's why I think it's very important that we have this kind of meetings like the COP26 in Glasgow, where the nations, not the politicians, but nations, they commit themselves for a long-term plan, that we have a framework. That's why it's important that this climate change mitigation goes into the law of the country, which is not changed every second year or third year. So there has to be more fundamental kind of, let's say, instruments, I think. And in case of Finland, for instance, we will have a law that enforces any government to move forward carbon neutrality, and I think many other countries do. So that making the let's say the mechanism framework irrespective of the politicians who come and go and may have personal interest is important. This is a very simple answer to a very good complex question, but I think those two elements have the global framework which enforces everybody. I mean, when your neighbor does something, neighbor country, I mean, most likely you will do something. So the more we get to the Paris Agreement countries, the more it will push forward. But then you need to embed this into your local legislation. And a law is a quite strong measure, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also see two dimensions to this incredibly complex challenge that you formed as a question. I think one dimension is this long-term vis-a-vis short-term. And there is no doubt that we need an inclusive, universal long-term vision. We have to agree on where we want to go, and then in the short term think about what are the steps to go in the right direction of achieving those goals. So I think we need short-term roadmaps that are flexible, adaptable, that would all hopefully lead to the long-term goals and not block that future. But the second dimension, I think, is what we discussed before, is the diversity. It's diversity, what needs to be common to all of us, and what should be diverse, or what should be allowed to be diverse. Just to give you an example so there is no misunderstanding, people were afraid that globalization would lead to huge homogenization, but it did not necessarily do that. Think about, we have restaurants of all sorts of parts of the world and cultures. We eat food from India, we would eat food from Japan, not just from Europe, in Europe, and vice versa. So diversity is not inconsistent with the common vision and goals and the common short-term change. And I hope that that's going to be in many facets of our life, that we can preserve our richness, yet have a common vision and goal that is implemented in the short term. So those two dimensions, I think, are important.
Okay. So I have a very last question because unfortunately the time has been crazily fast. And I want to go talking about short-term, long-term, etc. And now going up to the question I had at the beginning about society. The question about technology and alienation was meant in a way like tech depriving the right to think. I was observing people playing with their phones here. Maybe you took notes. I don't know if you checked your mails. I mean, I was also typing here, but I was typing questions. So alienating, not to think, not to be there, not to be, you know, like on top of things, or alienation is being prevented to think properly. What's your take on that one before we take the final poll?
Peter or me, who goes first?
Both of you. You can decide.
All right.
Naki, go on first.
Yeah, I'll go first. You know, I don't see that negatively, to be honest. You know, we talked about the risks of many of these changes we are talking about. You know, I think the reason why change also takes a long time until it becomes pervasive is that we all have to become comfortable with it. You know, there is an inherent resistance in all of us against the unknown. It's natural. It's perfectly natural. And I think that helps improve the innovation, avoid the risks that we talk about, make it socially acceptable to everybody. The trouble is, and that would be my concluding thought, the trouble is that we are likely to run out of time. So in some sense, time is the most precious resource because these processes take a long time. And I think this skepticism and opposition to change has a positive role, but it also has that negative role that it doesn't allow us to do the big transformation that's required towards sustainability in the time that might be needed. I mean, we have only 30 years in some ways, so time is precious.
Pressure. Yes, you're right. Peter.
I think we, as a human beings, we are careful with change because in prehistorical times, very often change may be a question of existence even. So that is something which is in our case always slightly resisting anything change. Me eating chocolate or whatever, this is very difficult. Okay, I shouldn't eat. Change is difficult. But I think very often it's important in society, when we think these big changes, you have to have some leading figures, countries who show the way. This is how our societies work. It may be you, individuals, countries, companies that show the way, that yes, we can do it. And by the way, this works well, it doesn't cost so much. And you have a better feeling about this technology.
Exactly.
And in that sense, I think it's again up to us. We get individuals standing up, showing, and taking the lead. That brings the big masses. It's very often in history, if you look on, it's some individuals that come. Look on the Enlightenment in the 18th century. A few individuals that changed the whole mindset. So I would call for you, individuals, people, to in a way take the lead. That's the people-centric policies. And I think that is what actually aligns everybody to a common goal.
Wonderful. Okay, that's a great final words before we go to the final poll. So online audience, get ready. And you here, we're going to count the fingers here. After all this discussion, we saw time is essential, right? So would we want a time machine really now after the discussion? And two possibilities here. Maybe yes, because it's too late. So things are gotten so bad, it's too late to change past now without time travel. We need this. Or maybe no, because we have hope. We are more positive. We see here two quite positive people. I didn't tell my personal opinion on this, by the way, but okay. So maybe no, we have hope because there are so many positive things to come out of this experience, and if we can manage it, we will manage it. We will manage redistribution of wealth, future sustainability. So maybe yes or maybe no. You said I didn't put yes or no. Maybe yes, rather yes, maybe no, rather no. So who is for yes? Yes, it's too late. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, well, okay. Not 10. So maybe no. So do we have any people? Maybe no. I want to see that it is really like, it's a vast majority, I would say at least like 80, 90%. So let's have a look at online in a second. Yes, we will, yes, it's too late otherwise, or maybe we can still fix things, right? So go on online. and see if you have the same message here. Otherwise, I take the time now to, maybe we can still fix things. That's interesting. We have, quite a similar proportion, like 66, well, 2/3. Yeah, well, okay, I'm not a scientist, okay, so I'm not going to count exactly, but it gives a good solution. And 71, it's still moving. It's still moving. 71, see, okay, good, we have one voice more. So I hope you had a good time with the time capsule here and explore what we could do. If I recap what the bright might say, I don't go into the technological detail because I take from this conversation, we are responsible. We have it into our hands, right? We need to work on a just society, more just society. We need to work also on this diversity and inclusiveness because this goes hand in hand with the innovation and a better revolution for the energetic change, so to speak. And time is the most precious resource. So even if we need to be careful with change, or we are careful with change, we need to take the lead. I hope this is the invitation for not only today, the next days, and for life. Thank you very much to all of you to have been here with us. Thanks to the tech team in the background. Thanks to SAPEA for inviting us for this wonderful discussion. It has been an honor and a privilege for me to lead this discussion with you guys. Fantastic. Thank you. And I know you met 30 years ago.
You're correct.
Yeah.
So that's also time travel here.
That's part of the time machine.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So now you can learn.
We believe in time machine. Actually, science is the time machine. Maybe sometimes malfunction, but it's there, and SAPEA is part of that time machine.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.